Hey folks, Pro Libertate, thank you again for watching. It's a beautiful night here in South Carolina. It was a lovely day. The falls here are just glorious. It's the glory of the South. So I'm out on my porch and just figured I would upload a video. Today I wanted to talk about this article I came across the other day. It's an older article. It was from 2012, but the point is still very much relevant. And it's called The Last Radicals. It's by a gentleman named Kevin D. Williamson. This is over on National Review. And it's on homeschooling. And I'll just read through the article and, just give some commentary and go from there. Homeschoolers occupy the curriculum. There is exactly one authentically radical social movement of any real significance in the United States. It is not Occupy, the Tea Party, or the Ron Paul faction. It is homeschoolers who, by the simple act of instructing their children at home, pose an intellectual, moral, and political challenge to the government monopoly schools, which are one of our most fundamental institutions and one of our most dysfunctional. Like all radical movements, homeschoolers drive the establishment bats. Absolutely. In the public imagination, homeschooling has a distinctively conservative and evangelical odor about it. But it is not always so. The modern homeschooling movement really has its roots in the 1960s countercultural tendencies. Along with a love supreme, it may represent the only worthwhile cultural product of that era. The movement's urtext is Summerhill, a radical approach to child rearing by A.S. Neal, which sold millions of copies in the 1960s and the 1970s. Neal was the headmaster of an English school organized, to the extent that it was organized, around neo-Freudian psychotherapeutic notions and Marxian ideas about the nature of power relationships in society. He looked forward to the day when conventional religion would wither away. Most of our religious practices are a sham, he declared, and in general had about as little in common with what most people regard as the typical homeschooler as it is possible to have. People forget that the first homeschoolers were hippies, says Bob Weisner, a counselor at Seton Hall Study School, a Catholic educational apostolate, reporting to the Bishop of Arlington, Virginia. In one of history's little ironies, today most of homeschooling's bitterest enemies are to be found on the left. We don't have much of a problem from conservatives, Weisner said. It's the teachers' unions, educational bureaucrats, and liberal professors. College professors, by and large, don't want students who can think for themselves. They want students they can indoctrinate, but that's hard to do with homeschoolers. Homeschoolers push back. He relishes the story of a number of graduates of his program who attended a top-tier Catholic university and enrolled together in theology classes taught by the school's most notorious liberals. They were, of course, more conversant with church orthodoxy than were many of their instructors. The professors hated them, but the kids had fun. The president of the college at the time was trying to clean up the theology department, so when the professors would complain, he would call the students in and tell them to try to be polite, with a wink and a nod. That's a good little story. But the key line in that paragraph was the homeschoolers push back, and the professors do not want students that can think for themselves. That's one of the goals of a true education, is to teach somebody how to think. Not necessarily what to think, but just how to think, right? You've given them the tools in order to work their way through any problem, to logically, rationally analyze data, right? What they want is people that will just accept your interpretation of the data. They don't want people who interpret the data for themselves and come up with their own conclusions, right? One of those professors is Robin West of Georgetown Law School, who wrote a remarkably shallow, evidence-free Jeremiad against homeschooling that was published to the journal's discredit in Philosophy and Public Policy Quarterly. More a work of imagination than one of scholarship, the article ignores the wealth of data suggesting that homeschooling is a largely upper-income suburban phenomenon, and that homeschooled students typically outperform their public-schooled peers. West offers a caricature of homeschooling families far removed from reality. Okay, this is what this lunatic says. The husbands and wives in these families feel themselves to be under a religious compulsion to have large families. A homebound and submissive wife and mother who is responsible for the schooling of the children, and only one breadwinner. These families are not living in romantic, rural, self-sufficient farmhouses. They are in trailer parks, 1,000-square-foot homes, houses owned by relatives, and some on tarps in fields and parking lots. Their lack of job skills, passed from one generation to the next, depresses the community's overall economic health and their state's tax base. Just think about that. I mean, so basically what she's saying, without actually saying it, because these people are always cowards, is that homeschoolers are all like poor white trash. That's what she's really trying to say. A bunch of, bucktooth, morons, with their knuckles dragging in the dirt, that live in trailer parks, and they're just rubes, right? So that's what she's saying without actually just saying it, okay? Just think about these lines. The husbands and wives feel themselves under a religious compulsion to have large families. The reason why a lot of homeschooling Christians have large families, it's not because of some compulsion to do so. I mean, there is the command in Scripture to be fruitful and multiply, right? But it's because we love children. And we know that having children is a way of, taking over the world. Letting you in on a little secret here, Robin. This is how we take over the world. Okay? It's through arrows. The Scripture compares children to arrows that are being fired out. And and I want arrows to shoot out. And so to get arrows, I raise up the next generation. I have kids. So it just, the only one breadwinner. Like, why is that a bad thing? Why is it a bad thing for kids to have mom at home? She just says it like it is. Now, I guarantee Robin is one of these people, who probably smells like kitty litter and loneliness if you got around her. She probably lives alone with her cats in an apartment, and drinks box wine and laments the decline of the nation because all these stupid evangelicals that are out there, right? She's one of those sorts of people. You can just tell that's the only kind of person that would write that sort of paragraph that we just read, okay? It's somebody like that. Education scholar Brian D. Ray, who specializes in homeschooling, found that West's claims basically have no foundation in research and evidence. No kidding. And pointed out, to the contrary, repeated studies by many researchers and data provided by the United States State Departments of Education show that home-educated students consistently score on average well above the public school average and standardized academic achievement tests. To date, no research has found homeschool students to do worse, on average, than their counterparts in state-run schools. Multiple studies by various researchers have found that home educated to be doing well in terms of social, emotional, and psychological development. Now, I don't know really how you can measure those things. That's always the thing when you talk to people about homeschooling. When they find out that you're a homeschool family, what about your kids? How are they going to be socialized, right? What about their socialization skills? And that always struck me as such an odd argument. Socialization skills. I mean, have you looked at American teenagers in the public school setting and their socialization skills? I mean, got their faces in their phones, like that kind of a thing, right? great socialization skills. That's what we want. That's what my kids are missing out on, right? By being homeschooled. They're missing out on those great socialization skills. So I don't really know how you can measure that, but just from anecdotally speaking, from my own experience, what really sold me on homeschooling was seeing a great homeschool family, probably about 20 years ago, and just the fantastic social skills of their kids. I mean, I was an adult at the time, but their children are all, younger or in their teens or whatever, and they were perfectly comfortable talking to adults and about anything. We talked about, books and movies, theology. It was really cool. And just seeing that and how intelligent they all were, I was like, I'm sold. like I was robbed. I went to government school, and seeing them and how great their family was and how well educated these kids were and how well socialized they were, I was sold. That's what sold me on it. It was seeing the fruit. Anyway, the problem is not educational outcomes, right? So, and that's another thing. You look at like the spelling bees, the geography bees. Who always wins those? It's not public school kids. It's always a private school kid or a homeschooled kid that's winning the spelling bees or the geography bees, right? I mean, that's who's always winning those things. So if it's about education, if it's about that sort of stuff, then the argument for the government-run schools, it's a losing one every time. Anyway, students at the Seton Hall program tend to score on average in the 80th percentile on standardized tests. The problem is that progressives operate as though the state owned children as joint property. Okay? Dana Goldstein, writing in Slate, urged her fellow progressives to resist the temptation to homeschool, arguing that the practice is fundamentally illiberal. And how is it illiberal? To be liberal is for freedom, right? And asking incredulously, could such a go-it-alone ideology ever be truly progressive? Okay. Wow. So we don't. Yeah, we're not going to be part of your collective, and so that's anti-progress. Okay. She went on to argue that the children of high-achieving parents amount to public goods because of peer effects. Poor students do better when mixed with better-off peers, meaning that when college-educated parents pull their kids out of public schools, whether for private school or homeschooling, they make it harder for less advantaged children to thrive. She does not extend that analysis to its logical conclusion, that conscientious, educated liberals, I should really say leftists, but should enroll their children in the worst public schools they can find in order to maximize the public good. It's an awesome point. And this is why I really like this article. It's well written, well thought out. It's one of those articles that I read really slowly just because I didn't want it to end. I'm like, this is so good. I like his little turns of phrase and his little subtle jabs, little tongue-in-cheek kind of comments. It's just very good. But yes, so if that's the issue, if it's about we want the smart kids to be around the dumb kids because that actually pushes the dumb kids to be smarter, then these guys should put their kids in the crummiest schools they can possibly find in order to uplift those crummy kids out of their crumminess, right? That's basically the point here, and it's a very well-found thrust. It's a thrust that hits home. So if you really believe this stuff, then why aren't you doing it, right? This is one of the things that I've always wondered is, why haven't they come for us yet, right? And I guess it's because they don't see us as much of a threat yet. But I'm just always amazed that we're still allowed to do this, that we're still allowed to homeschool, and that they haven't come down on us yet for this. I mean, the day's eventually going to come when we get somebody like Beto in there or whoever down the road, and they're going to come for us because they can't have people outside of the system, right? They're going to want everybody to be part of Drag Queen Story Hour when Drag Queen Story Hour becomes mandatory. They're going to want that. That's going to be part of the public school education, all that sort of stuff. All these things are going to be mandatory. And obviously, if somebody's homeschooled, the parents aren't going to, subject their kids to that sort of nonsense. And so we need to eliminate that. Everybody needs to be subjected to right think, right? Let's see. You kind of get the idea here. He gets into the legality of it. Yeah, here. The first is that progressives, by their nature, do not trust people as individuals to feel that whether we are applying for a credit card or popping into a 7-Eleven for a soft drink, Americans require state-appointed overseers. It's absolutely the case. If homeschooling weren't already legal, a happy consequence of the long-standing patchwork of exemptions in state-level mandatory education statutes, it is highly unlikely that most state legislatures would vote to legalize it. 9/10 of American children attend government schools, and most of the remaining tenth attend government-approved private schools. The political class wants as many of that remaining tenth in government schools as possible. Teachers' unions have money on the line, and ideologues do not want any young skull beyond their curricular reach. A political class that does not trust people with a big gulp is not going to trust them with the minds of children. Excellent line. That's up in New York State, I believe. Yeah, they outlawed sodas over a certain size. Okay, they don't trust you to be able to regulate how much soda you drink. How the heck are they going to trust you to educate a child? Right? They don't trust us with plastic straws. Right? They don't trust us with toilets that flush over 1.5 gallons per flush. Why in the world would they trust us to bring up the next generation? Okay? It's an excellent line, excellent point. While West would like to criminalize homeschooling, she writes wistfully of the days when parents who did so were criminals. Others have sought to regulate it out of existence. For instance, by declaring homeschoolers' residents to be public schools and requiring them to meet attendant, planning, and zoning standards by installing such things as fire safety systems, parking facilities, and emergency exits. Just horrific. Just think about that. That their real aim in all of that is to just destroy you. But it's all done in the name of, parking and, it's like their real goal is destruction. It's so evil. These people are just freaking evil. That they're going to use law to destroy something. They're going to use zoning to destroy you. He goes through some of his reasons here. These are good. The second reason for the hostility is that while there is a growing number of secular, progressive, organic quinoa consuming homeschool families, there remains a significant conservative and Christian component. The reasons for progressive hostility to conservative Christians are many and complex, but one of them is that, like the homeschool, the church is something outside of government control, a forum that the triple constitutional protections of religion, free speech, and association place beyond the range of Leviathan's leash. Progressives are by their nature monopolists, and the churches constitute real competing centers of power in society. It's absolutely the case. What was the old, I think Mussolini's dictum? He said, nothing against the state, nothing outside the state. and nothing opposed to the state, something like that. Basically, everything within the state, nothing outside the state, and nothing against the state. That's what he said. And just that's their mindset. That's their mindset. And homeschooling and the church represents something outside and against the state. Okay, very much so. And so they want it gone. They see it as a horrible thing. The only kind of people that would participate in that are people who live in trailers. They're probably on welfare. The guy comes home and beats his wife. That kind of thing. That was like the picture she was trying to portray earlier, right? Just total trashy people, right? And nothing can be further from the truth. That's not at all what it's like. A third reason is that the majority of homeschool teachers are mothers. A traditional two-parent family with one full-time breadwinner and one stay-at-home parent is practically built into the model. Absolutely. Goldstein scoffs at that as a dated presumption that children hail from two-parent families in which at least one parent can afford and wants to take significant time away from paid work. Again, Goldstein, she's another one that sounds like a person who lives alone with her cats. Okay? You can see her in her apartment coming home to her fur babies, as these people call them now, and and railing against how horrible the institution of marriage is, while she drowns herself, in a tub of Ben and Jerry's and loneliness. I can almost guarantee that's how these people live, and they just sneer and plug their noses in disgust at the idea of a family. It's like, but then they're gonna cry over their tub of Ben and Jerry's about how lonely they are, but then they're gonna mock the family. It's just so absurd. These people are pathetic, and it's just this, just really pathetic people sneering at something that's good and wholesome that they can't have, or that they refuse to have, because it takes sacrifice. That's the thing. It takes sacrifice. She thinks selfishness is how you win. Well, she's selfish, probably alone, All right. He goes on. It's a good article. I'll just end with the final paragraph. Or let me start in here in the middle. Homeschooling represents a kind of libertarian impulse, but of a different sort. It's not about money. Homeschooling families pay their taxes to support local public schools like any other family, which is to say, begrudgingly in many cases. And the movement does not seek the abolition of local government education monopolies. It should. Well, I do. I want them gone. They're horrible. Like, what should really be going on is just local schools, local school co-ops, right? Put on by the local families. It would be far more efficient. There'd be far more accountability, and it's just it would just be a better education as well. The curriculum wouldn't be the standardized garbage handed down from on high. It could be a robust, thorough curriculum. Homeschooling families simply choose not to participate in the system, or if they do, to participate on their own terms. Liberals hate that. Leftists, I should say. Leftists hate that. And that is a step too far for the Hobbesian progressives, who view politics as a constant contest between the state and the state of nature, as though the entire world were on a sliding scale between Sweden and Somalia. Homeschoolers may have many different and incompatible political beliefs, but they all implicitly share an opinion about bureaucrats. They don't need them. Not always, not as much as the bureaucrats think. That's what makes them radical, and to those with a certain view of the world, terrifying. Absolutely. Kevin Williams, excellent article, well written, well thought out, and it really captures, the marrow of what this was all about. When Trump won and he started appointing people to cabinet offices, apart from Brett Kavanaugh, the one that drew the most criticism from the left was Betsy DeVos, because of her homeschool voucher program that she wanted to implement. Okay, the left understands the importance of education. They understand that it's a tool for shaping the next generation, of indoctrinating people in their nonsense ideas. When I was in school, I got a hefty dose of environmental nonsense. Okay, I've told some of those stories in the previous video. Got a hefty dose of that. Like, it seemed like we're talking about it every freaking day. We're talking about saving the planet, how species are going extinct, blah, blah, blah. All this stuff. And so it was preparing me to accept the stuff today. They're preparing us to accept the nonsense that's going to come down the road. They're going to try to, control and implement more regulations in the name of saving the planet. So in order to get people to go along with that, they got to convince them that there's a problem with the planet. And so what better way to do that than in the public schools? Start cramming it in these kids' heads when they're only 7, 8 years old, right? So that's where you got to start jamming that stuff into their heads, okay? So they don't want that. They don't want people who are outside of that box. And that's why the homeschoolers are the radicals. If you don't homeschool your kids, or at least private school them, I highly encourage you at least look into the idea, to look into your options. We're obviously a homeschool family, and absolutely love it. My children are getting a robust classical education. I mean, they're reading they're reading the stuff that I wish I got when I was a kid. I was thoroughly robbed. Seeing the stuff that they get to read, the things that they get to learn, I realized how robbed I was in the public school, learning about environmentalism when I could have been, reading like Marcus Aurelius. I could have been reading about the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. I could have been reading the works of Dante, right? I could have been learning Latin. I could have been learning logic, right? I could have been learning about our history as Westerners. But instead, I'm reading Maya Angelou's stupid poems, and this garbage that they keep shoveling into these kids' minds. Okay, that's just on the education side. So you can just get just as far if the point is about education, then the data is there. It's not even just anecdotal. The data is there. Private schooling and homeschooling educated children far outperform their government school counterparts. It's right there in the article. The data's there. You can look it up. So it's all there. So if it's about education, this is the way to go. And if it's about socialization, like I was saying, I mean, these homeschooled kids, I mean, they have better social skills. The kids I see, in our church and stuff, they're far better socialized than, any government school kids that I see. They're more willing to talk to adults, talk to people outside of their age group. That was one of the things when kids are shuffled into these little age brackets. They only really know how to interact with people of their same age, right? That's one of the things too. John Dewey and Horace Mann, they talked explicitly about the goals of public education. They said explicitly that one of the reasons that they wanted to do this, that they really wanted to push for public education, is because as it was, the kids are at home and they're getting and they're with their families, and we want the state to be their family. This is what these dudes said. This isn't just like some conspiracy theorist. These dudes said it loud and clear. Dewey, Horace Mann. They wanted the state to become the family. And the problem is these kids are at home too much, right? And so we got to break that up. We got to get them in, these government schools, and they had the factory model. So just think about it. The government schools are basically factories, right? So a bell rings, you go to a class. Bell rings, you go to another class. Bell rings, you go to lunch, right? It's just like a factory. That's what it was meant to simulate. And that's why they get these kids up at, ungodly hours. I remember being a kid and I had to go catch the bus. I'd be out there, I had to be out there at like 6 a.m. or something to catch the freaking bus. So I could sit on the bus for like 40 minutes while the bus drove us to school, right? And then start class at 7:30. Okay, so I'd have to get up at like 5 a.m. It was like being a factory worker. And that's the whole point. That's what it's modeled after, We'd have like little tones. It wouldn't. See, that was one of the things too. They got rid of like the old church schools. They'd have like the church bell. The church bell would ring. Well, they got rid of that, and they went with like buzzers and tones because it's more like a factory. Factories don't really have the church bell, right? So you'd have like a buzzer or a tone. I remember my high school and my middle school had these tones. So there'd be like this tone. It'd be like a beep, and you'd know, oh, time to go. So you'd robotically go to your next thing. It was training you to be a worker, right? That's what it's all about. So it's not about education at that point. So if those are the socialization skills that are being missed out on, okay, I don't want my kids to necessarily be workers. I want them, I want them to be the employer, right? Ideally, I want them to work for themselves. I want them to, be successful in that way, not begging another person for a job. It's fine to be an employee. Don't get me wrong. I'm saying we should aspire to higher goals than that, right? So that's that's what the school model is based off. It's the factory, and they said it. And I do know, like Rockefeller, he talked about that stuff as well, like with like feminism, the feminist movement, and funding that, and saying they wanted to get women out of the house, right? Because this is one of the things that one of these hacks below that we just read about lamented, that, oh man, these women, they're in the house, they could be out making money. Like, what's more dignified and what's more lasting and more worthwhile and than raising your children as a woman? What, going and working for some other man? That's better than nurturing and raising children? It's insane. I mean, the people who believe these delusions, believe these lies, they're robbing themselves. That's the nature of believing lies. You end up robbing yourself of great blessings. And it's thoroughly the case here with when it comes to this, get out of the house thing. But yeah, Rockefeller, he was saying they wanted to get the women out of the house, so these kids would be more in the clutches of the state. And furthermore, there was 50% of the population, women, weren't being taxed. If you get them out in the workforce, there's more taxes, right? I mean, the liberals are always talking, or lefties are always talking like that, that enriching a community through taxes or whatever. And so they want that. And so they, like I said, they scoff and they sneer at the things that are most beautiful in life. Like I say, these people that live alone with their cats, and when they see something good and true and beautiful, they just plug their noses in disgust. We're not the ones that smell like cat litter. All right. Thanks again for watching. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Have a good night. Take care.